The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Unionville, Nevada trading post, and Rebecca Rousseau knew immediately she had made a terrible mistake coming to this godforsaken corner of the Nevada Territory in the summer of 1867. Dust swirled around her skirts as she stepped down from the coach, her gloved hands gripping the doorframe for balance. The air felt like breathing in an oven, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the single dusty street that comprised most of the town. A few weathered buildings stood like sentinels against the barren mountainside, their paint peeled away by wind and time. This was nothing like Boston. Nothing at all. "Your trunk, miss," the driver called down, already moving to unlatch the heavy leather straps securing the luggage. Rebecca turned to see him struggling with her large steamer trunk, the one her mother had insisted she bring despite her protests. It was packed with everything her family deemed necessary for a respectable woman setting up a household, even in the wilds of Nevada. Books, linens, her grandmother's china, 3 months' worth of correspondence course materials for the teaching position she had secured sight unseen, and enough fabric to clothe half the women in whatever small town awaited her up in the mountains. "I can help," she offered, though she knew it was futile. The thing weighed more than most saddles, probably more than 2 saddles combined. "No need, miss. Just point me where you want it." She looked around helplessly. The letter from the school board had said someone would meet her here, would help transport her the remaining 8 miles up to Silver Ridge, the mining camp where she would be teaching. But the street was empty except for a few men standing outside the saloon, watching her with open curiosity. "I am supposed to meet someone," she said, hearing the uncertainty in her own voice. "A Mr. Henderson. He was meant to arrange transportation." The driver set her trunk down with a grunt, wiping his brow. "Don't know about that, miss. I just know my route ends here. You could ask at the trading post." Before she could respond, a voice cut through the hot afternoon air. "You the new school teacher?" Rebecca turned to find a massive figure approaching from the shadows between buildings. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of a doorway. His buckskin shirt stretched across a chest thick with muscle, and his arms, bare to the elbow, showed the kind of strength that came from years of hard labor in unforgiving country. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. His eyes, she noticed as he came closer, were in startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "I am," she managed, trying not to stare. She had seen large men before, but something about this one made her acutely aware of how small she was in comparison, how delicate her world of books and propriety seemed against his raw physicality. "Vaughn Ashford," he said, not offering his hand. Mountain men rarely observed such niceties. She had been warned. "Henderson's laid up with a broken leg, asked me to bring you up to Silver Ridge." "Oh." Rebecca glanced back at her trunk, then at the single horse tied to the post behind him. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Ashford, but I have rather a lot of luggage." His gaze followed hers to the trunk, and for a moment she thought she saw amusement flicker in those gray eyes. But he said nothing, just walked over and hefted the trunk onto his shoulder in one smooth motion. As if it weighed no more than a sack of flour, Rebecca's mouth fell open. "Mr. Ashford, you cannot possibly carry that all the way up the mountain. It is 8 miles of rough terrain. Surely we can arrange for a wagon or a mule or something." He was already walking toward a narrow trail that led up into the hills, her trunk balanced on his shoulder, his other hand carrying his rifle with casual ease. "No wagons make it up that way. Trail's too narrow in places. Horse'll carry you. I'll manage this." "But it is absurdly heavy," she protested, hurrying after him in her travel-stained dress. "There must be another way." "Lots of things are heavy, Miss Rousseau. You coming or staying?" The driver had already climbed back onto his coach, clearly eager to be on his way. The men outside the saloon were still watching, and Rebecca felt the weight of their stares almost as much as Vaughn Ashford must feel the weight of her trunk. She had no choice, really. She had used the last of her money for the stage coach fare. She could not go back to Boston even if she wanted to. "I am coming," she said, gathering her skirts and moving toward the horse. Vaughn stopped long enough to help her mount, his large hands circling her waist and lifting her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing. The casual strength in that gesture sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. She told herself it was just nerves, just the strangeness of this whole situation. They left Unionville behind, climbing into the mountains on a trail that was barely more than a suggestion worn into the rocky slope. The horse picked its way carefully, and Rebecca clung to the saddle horn, unused to riding. Behind her, she could hear Vaughn's steady footsteps, never faltering despite the burden on his shoulder. After an hour, guilt overcame her discomfort. She twisted in the saddle to look back at him. He walked with the same easy stride he had started with, his breathing not even labored. Sweat darkened his shirt, but his face showed no strain. "Mr. Ashford, please let us rest. You must be exhausted." "I am fine." "But surely you need water or a moment to catch your breath." "Do you need water?" he asked instead. She realized her throat was parched, her lips dry from the desert air. "I would not mind some, yes." He nodded toward a cluster of rocks ahead. "We'll stop there, there's shade." They stopped in the shadow of the rocks, and Vaughn lowered the trunk to the ground with the same care he might use setting down something fragile. He pulled a canteen from his pack and handed it to her without taking a drink himself. "You should drink too," Rebecca said. "I will. Ladies first." The water was warm but tasted like salvation. She drank deeply, then handed it back. "Thank you." He drank, his throat working, and she found herself watching the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own observation. "Why did you come out here?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "I needed work. I have teaching experience, and the position was available. The salary is quite good, actually, considering what? Considering how far from civilization it is." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's why the salary's good. Most teachers don't last more than a few months once they realize what they have signed up for." "I intend to last," Rebecca said, lifting her chin. "I am not some fragile flower who wilts at the first sign of hardship. Never said you were." He stood, shouldering the trunk again. "But Silver Ridge is rough. Mining camp, mostly men, hard living. The children who need teaching, their families are barely scraping by. You will have to teach in whatever building they can spare, with whatever supplies you can scrounge. No fancy schoolhouse, no books except what you brought." "I brought quite a few books," she said, thinking of the weight in her trunk. "That is part of why it is so heavy." That would explain it. He started walking again, and she urged the horse to follow. They climbed higher as the afternoon wore on. The desert heat gave way to slightly cooler air, though the sun still beat down relentlessly. The landscape was beautiful in a stark way, all red rock and scattered pine with vast views stretching out below them. Rebecca had never seen anything like it. Boston had its charms, its history and culture, but this was something else entirely. This was raw and real and terrifying. "Do you live in Silver Ridge, Mr. Ashford?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "Near it. Got a cabin about 2 miles out." "What do you do? For work, I mean." "Hunt, trap, scout sometimes. Whatever needs doing." "That sounds like a difficult life." "It suits me." She waited for him to elaborate, but he offered nothing more. He was not rude exactly, but he clearly did not feel the need to fill silence with conversation the way people back east did. It was unnerving and oddly restful at the same time. They stopped twice more as the trail grew steeper. Each time Vaughn set down the trunk without complaint, offered her water, waited patiently while she stretched her sore legs. The horse was sure-footed but slow, and she worried about how late it was getting. The sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains. "Will we make it before dark?" she asked during the third stop. "Should, another hour, maybe less. You have been carrying that trunk for 7 miles. About that. And you are not even winded." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the intensity of that gray gaze like a physical thing. "You keep expecting me to complain. I told you I would get you and your belongings to Silver Ridge. I keep my word, Miss Rousseau. I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I have never seen anyone carry something so heavy for so long without at least mentioning the difficulty. What good would mentioning it do? Would it make the trunk lighter? Would it make the trail shorter?" She had no answer for that, so she said nothing. The sun was touching the mountaintops when they finally crested a ridge and Silver Ridge came into view. It was bigger than she had expected. A sprawling collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship. She could hear the distant sound of machinery, the stamp mill processing ore, and see smoke rising from what must be the smelter. There were people moving along the main street, and lights beginning to glow in windows as evening approached. "It is bigger than I thought," she said. "Silver strike last year brought a lot of people. They will move on when the silver runs out. That is the way of these places." "How long do you think that will be?" He shrugged. The trunk still balanced on his shoulder. Year, maybe 2, maybe more, hard to say. They descended into the camp, and people stopped to stare as they passed. Rebecca felt herself blushing under the scrutiny. She must look a sight, dusty and disheveled from the journey, perched on a horse while a mountain man carried her absurdly heavy trunk behind her. Vaughn led them to a small building at the edge of the camp, set slightly apart from the others. It was simple but well built, with a porch and actual glass windows, which was more than many of the structures could boast. "This is the teacher's quarters," he said, finally setting the trunk down on the porch. "School's next door, such as it is." Rebecca dismounted, grateful to be off the horse despite her shaky legs. She looked at the little house, then at Vaughn, who was rolling his shoulders now that he was finally free of his burden. "Mr. Ashford, I cannot thank you enough. What you did today, carrying all that way without a word of complaint, it was extraordinary. It was necessary. You needed help. I provided it. Still, I am grateful. May I offer you some payment?" I have not much, but surely something for your time and offended. Henderson asked me to help. I helped. No payment needed, but surely no payment, Miss Rousseau. His voice was firm but not unkind. You will need every dollar you have for the winter. Supplies are expensive up here, and if you are planning to stay, you will want to stock up before the first snow. When does it snow here? October, usually. Sometimes earlier. She looked around at the bare rocks and sparse vegetation. It is hard to imagine snow here. You will see it soon enough. Get yourself settled tonight. Someone from the school board will be by tomorrow to explain things, show you the school building. If you need anything, the trading post is at the center of town. Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her I sent you, and she'll treat you fair. He was already turning to leave, collecting his horse's reins. Mr. Ashford, Rebecca called out. He paused, looking back. Will I see you again? Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. It is a small camp. You will see everyone again eventually. Then he was walking away, leading his horse into the gathering dusk, and Rebecca was left standing on the porch of her new home, surrounded by mountains and strangers. With a trunk full of books and a heart full of uncertainty, the interior of the house was sparse but clean. One room served as living space and bedroom, with a small stove in the corner and a narrow bed against one wall. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center, and a few shelves lined the walls. Someone had left a lamp and matches, and she lit it gratefully as darkness fell outside. She was too tired to unpack properly, but she opened the trunk enough to pull out a nightgown and her washing things. There was a pump outside, and the water that came up was shockingly cold, making her gasp as she splashed it on her face. But it felt good, washing away the dust and grime of travel. Inside again, she changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she had been in Boston, living with her sister's family, teaching at a respectable girls' academy. Then had come the letter from her sister's husband, carefully worded but clear in its message. They could no longer afford to house her. His business had suffered losses. They had their own children to think of. Perhaps Rebecca might find a position that included lodging. The position in Silver Ridge had seemed like providence, arriving as it did just when she needed it most. The salary was 3 times what she had been making, and housing was included. She had not let herself think too much about what it would be like, had not let herself imagine the reality of living in a mining camp in the Nevada Territory. Now she was here, and there was no going back. She thought about Vaughn Ashford as she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp settling in for the night. He had carried her trunk 8 miles uphill without complaint, without even seeming to find it particularly difficult. She had seen the muscle in his arms and shoulders, the way his body moved with unconscious power and grace. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston, with their soft hands and softer bodies, their endless talk and social posturing. But it was not just his physical strength that intrigued her. It was the quiet competence, the way he did what needed doing without fuss or fanfare, the way he had made sure she had water before taking any himself, the way he had refused payment knowing she would need every penny. She told herself it was just gratitude she was feeling, nothing more. Gratitude and exhaustion and the strangeness of this new life. Tomorrow she would wake up and begin the work she had come here to do. She would teach the children of Silver Ridge and make a life for herself in this harsh, beautiful place. She did not need to think about gray eyes and strong hands, and the way her heart had skipped when he lifted her onto the horse. She absolutely did not need to think about any of that. Morning came with startling brightness, sunlight streaming through the window and birdsong she did not recognize. Rebecca dressed in one of her simpler day dresses, dark blue calico that would not show dirt as easily as her finer things. She braided her hair, pinning it up in a style that was practical rather than fashionable, and stepped outside to face her first full day in Silver Ridge. The camp looked different in daylight, less ominous and more merely rough. Buildings in various states of completion crowded together along the main street and scattered up the hillsides. She could see the mine entrance partway up the mountain, a dark mouth in the rock face with rail tracks leading to it. Men were already at work despite the early hour, and she could hear the sound of hammering and sawing, the perpetual noise of a boomtown building itself into existence. A woman was approaching across the dusty ground, picking her way carefully around rocks and refuse. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression, dressed in a practical cotton dress and apron. "You must be Miss Rousseau," she called out as she got closer. "I am Dorothy Patterson. My husband sits on the school board." "Mrs. Patterson, how nice to meet you." Rebecca stepped down from the porch, offering her hand. Dorothy shook it with a firm grip. "I am sure you are wondering what you have gotten yourself into, so I will give it to you straight. We have about 30 children of school age, though you will be lucky to see 20 on any given day. Their parents need them for chores, and some do not see much point in education. The school building is not much, but it has a roof and walls and a stove for winter. We can provide slates and chalk, but not much else. You mentioned in your letter that you were bringing books? Yes, quite a few. They are in my trunk. Good, you will need them. Dorothy started walking toward the building next door, and Rebecca followed. We can pay you monthly, first of each month. If you need anything from the trading post before then, tell Mrs. Chen to put it on your account, and we will settle it from your first payment. Do not let the men bother you. Most of them are harmless, but stay out of the saloons and keep to yourself as much as possible. This is not Boston. I gathered that, Rebecca said dryly. Dorothy shot her a look that might have been approval. Some of the women from the respectable families will likely call on you soon. Be polite, but do not let them run your life. They mean well, but they can be overbearing. You are here to teach, not to be a performing monkey for their entertainment. The school building was indeed not much. It was essentially a large shed, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with rough plank walls and a floor that was more gaps than wood. Benches served as desks, and there was a battered table at the front that would serve as her teacher's desk. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner, unlit in the summer heat. I know it is not impressive, Dorothy said, watching her take it in, but it is what we have. The children will come on Monday. That gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. Do you have any questions? Rebecca had about 1,000 questions, but she settled for the most practical. How old are the children? Range from 5 to 15. You will need to teach them all at once. Different levels, different abilities. Some can barely read, some are quite advanced. You will figure out how to manage it. And the parents, will they be involved? Some will not. A few will complain no matter what you do. Ignore them. The children are what matter. Dorothy left shortly after, promising to send some of the women by with supplies and advice. Rebecca spent the rest of the morning unpacking her trunk, carrying armloads of books next door to the school building, and arranging them on a makeshift shelf someone had hammered to the wall. She had primers and readers, arithmetic texts, a precious copy of Shakespeare's complete works, several volumes of poetry, an atlas from 1860, and a Bible. It was not much to stock a school, but it was more than most mining camps had. By midday she was hungry and decided to venture out to find the trading post. The main street was busy, men going about their business, wagons hauling ore down from the mine. She drew stares, but no one bothered her as she made her way to the large building at the center of town. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind for business. Her English was heavily accented but perfectly clear. "You are the teacher," she said when Rebecca introduced herself. "Vaughn said you would come. I have supplies ready." "Supplies?" "He came by this morning. Said to prepare a basket for you. Basic things to get started he already paid." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. He should not have done that. "I can pay for my own supplies. Too late, already done." Mrs. Chen hefted a heavy basket onto the counter. "Flour, salt, beans, coffee, sugar, dried meat, lard, matches, soap. Basics. You need more, you come back. I really must repay him." Mrs. Chen gave her a look that was almost pitying. "You can try. He will not take it. That is how Vaughn is. He helps. That is what he does. He barely knows me. Does not matter. You needed help. He helps. Simple." Rebecca took the basket, its weight making her arms ache immediately. "Does he help everyone like this?" "Everyone who needs it. Why you think people here respect him? He is not from Silver Ridge, not really. Lives alone up the mountain. Comes down when he wants. But when someone needs something, he shows up. Fixed Mrs. Patterson's roof last winter when her husband was sick. Brought meat to the widow Kelly when her sons were working double shifts. Pulled 3 men out of a mine collapse last spring. Never asks for anything in return. Just does what needs doing." Rebecca carried the heavy basket back to her little house, her mind turning over this new information. She had thought Vaughn was just being kind to her specifically, but apparently this was simply who he was. A man who helped people without expecting anything in return, who carried heavy burdens without complaint, who did what needed doing simply because it needed doing. It made her want to know more about him, which was dangerous. She was here to teach, to build a life for herself. She could not afford to develop feelings for a mountain man who lived alone and probably preferred it that way. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and social calls. Dorothy had been right about the women. They descended on Rebecca in small groups, bringing food and advice in equal measure. Most were kind, genuinely wanting to help the new teacher settle in. A few were clearly just curious, wanting to inspect the newcomer and report back to their friends. Rebecca endured it all with as much grace as she could muster, accepting gifts of preserves and baked goods, listening to stories about the camp and its inhabitants, learning who was important and who was dangerous and who was harmless but annoying. She saw Vaughn only once during those first days. He was across the street talking to a man outside the blacksmith's shop, and she felt her heart do that stupid skip again just at the sight of him. He was wearing the same buckskin shirt or one very like it, his dark hair tied back with a strip of leather, his rifle slung across his back. He looked up as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met for a moment across the dusty street. She thought he might come over, might speak to her. But he just nodded slightly, a bare acknowledgement, and turned back to his conversation. Rebecca told herself she was not disappointed and did not quite believe it. Monday arrived faster than she felt ready for. She was at the school building by 7, though classes were not set to start until 8. She had spent Sunday arranging the benches, writing a simple alphabet on the one slate board she had, setting out books and supplies. Now she stood in front of the building, watching the children arrive. They came in small groups, some with parents, some alone. They ranged from tiny 5-year-olds clutching their older siblings' hands to gangly teenagers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. By 8:30, she had 22 students crammed onto the benches, all staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Good morning," she said, her voice only shaking slightly. "My name is Miss Rousseau, and I am your new teacher. I know you are all at different levels, and that is fine. We are going to work together to make sure everyone learns something new this year. Let us start by going around and having each of you tell me your name and something you enjoy doing." The first few days of teaching were exhausting but exhilarating. The children were a mixed bunch, some eager to learn, some resistant, all of them products of this rough mining camp. She had students who could barely write their names sitting next to students who could recite poetry. She had children who showed up with bruises they would not explain, and children who glowed with health and happiness. She had troublemakers and saints and everything in between, but she was good at this. She had always been good at teaching. She knew how to engage a restless boy by giving him a problem to solve, how to encourage a shy girl by praising her careful handwriting, how to challenge the bright ones while helping the struggling ones catch up. By the end of the first week, she felt like she was actually making progress. Friday afternoon, after the children had gone home, she was sweeping the school floor when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up to find Vaughn standing there, his large frame nearly filling the opening. "Mr. Ashford," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "Wanted to see how your first week went." "It went well, I think. The children are lovely, most of them anyway. A few troublemakers, but nothing I cannot handle." He stepped inside, looking around the space with an appraising eye. "You need more wood for the stove before winter, and those gaps in the floor need filling or you will freeze come December. I will mention it to the school board. They will promise to get to it and then forget. I will take care of it. Mr. Ashford, you cannot keep doing things for me. You have already done far too much. It is not just for you, it is for the children. They deserve a warm place to learn." He was right, and she could not argue with that logic. "Then at least let me help somehow." I do not know, cook you dinner as a thank you?" She expected him to refuse the way he had refused payment before, but instead he considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow evening?" "Tomorrow evening," she agreed, wondering what she had just gotten herself into. He left and she stood holding the broom, her heart racing inexplicably. It was just dinner. Just a simple thank you meal for someone who had helped her. Nothing to get flustered about. But she was flustered anyway. Saturday she spent cleaning her little house and preparing the best meal she could manage with her limited supplies and even more limited cooking skills. She had never been much of a cook, which had been fine in Boston where her sister had managed the household. Here, cooking was survival, and she was learning fast. She made beans with salt pork, biscuits that turned out only slightly burned on the bottom, and a dried apple pie using fruit from Mrs. Chen's store. It was simple food, nothing fancy, but it smelled good and looked edible, which was about all she could hope for. Vaughn arrived exactly at 6, clean-shaven and with his hair tied back. He looked almost civilized, though nothing could really tame the wild edge about him. He had brought a bottle of wine, which surprised her. "Where did you get wine in a mining camp?" she asked, letting him in. "Saved it from before. Figured this was a good occasion to open it." They ate at her small table, and the conversation was surprisingly easy. He asked about her teaching, and she found herself telling him about the children, about the little triumphs and frustrations of the week. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. "What made you become a teacher?" he asked. "I liked learning," she said, "and I was good at it. When I finished my own schooling, teaching seemed like the natural choice. I could support myself, be independent. That mattered to me." "Why?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than evasion. "My father died when I was young. My mother remarried, but her new husband did not want another man's children around. My brother went west to California, and I went to live with my older sister. She and her husband were kind, but I always knew I was a burden. I wanted to be able to take care of myself, to not be dependent on anyone else's charity. That is not weakness, wanting to stand on your own. Some people think it is. They think women should be content to be taken care of, should not want independence. Those people are fools." He said it matter-of-factly, as if it were simply an observable truth. she smiled. You are not like most men I have met. I could say the same about you and most women. What do you mean? Most women would have complained about that trunk, about the walk, about the heat. You just did what needed doing. Like teaching in that shack of a schoolhouse without complaining about what you do not have. You work with what you have got. That is not common in my experience. I suppose we are both practical people then. Seems like. After dinner, they sat on her small porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they looked painted. In the valley below, lights were beginning to glow in the buildings of Silver Ridge. It is beautiful here, Rebecca said. Harsh but beautiful. That is a good way to put it. This land does not forgive mistakes, but if you respect it, it gives back. Is that why you came here, to this life? He was quiet for a long moment. I came west after the war. Could not go back to what I had been before. Too much had changed. I had changed. I tried the cities for a while, but they felt wrong. Too many people, too much noise. I kept moving until I found places like this, where a man could breathe. I have been here 3 years now, longest I have stayed anywhere since the war ended. She wanted to ask more about the war, about what he had seen and done, but something in his tone told her it was not a subject he wanted to explore. So instead she said, I am glad you are here. I do not know what I would have done that first day without your help. You would have figured something out. You are resourceful perhaps, but I am still glad it was you. He turned to look at her then, and in the fading light his gray eyes were almost silver. I am glad too. The moment stretched between them, full of something unnamed. Rebecca felt it like a physical presence, a pull toward this quiet, strong man who carried heavy burdens without complaint and helped without expectation of return. She wanted to lean closer, wanted to close the distance between them on the narrow porch. But before she could move, Vaughn stood. I should go. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for coming. He left, disappearing into the gathering darkness, and Rebecca sat alone on her porch, wondering what was happening to her carefully constructed plans for independence and solitary self-sufficiency. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Rebecca taught during the days, pouring herself into the work of educating children who desperately needed it. The mining camp was rough, and many of the children had seen things no child should see, had lived through hardships that would break most adults. But they were also resilient and curious and hungry to learn when given the chance. She started staying after school hours to work with students who were struggling, and soon she had a handful of regulars who came for extra help. A boy named Thomas who was brilliant with numbers but could barely read. A girl named Sarah who was so shy she could hardly speak above a whisper but wrote stories that made Rebecca's heart ache with their beauty. Twin brothers who were always getting into trouble but had more energy and enthusiasm than anyone else in class. Vaughn was a regular presence, though never in an intrusive way. He fixed the gaps in the floor as promised, brought wood for the stove, repaired benches when they broke. He never made a production of it, just showed up and did the work and left again. Sometimes Rebecca would arrive in the morning to find repairs had been done overnight, and she would know he had been there even though she had not seen him. They fell into the habit of having dinner together every Saturday. Sometimes she cooked, sometimes he brought game he had hunted, and they would prepare it together at her little stove. He taught her how to cook venison properly, how to make a decent stew with whatever ingredients she had on hand. She read to him from her books, discovering that he loved poetry but had never had much access to it. I am not educated like you, he admitted one evening. Never had much schooling. I can read and write, but not fancy. Education and intelligence are not the same thing, Rebecca said. You are one of the smartest people I have ever met. Because I can track a deer and fix a broken bench? Because you see what needs doing and you do it. Because you understand people and treat them with respect. Because you listen more than you talk. Those are kinds of intelligence that matter more than knowing Latin or calculus. He looked at her with something like wonder. You really believe that? Of course I do. It is true. October arrived with shocking speed, and with it came the first real cold. Rebecca woke one morning to find frost on the ground and her breath misting in the air inside her little house. She lit the stove quickly, grateful that Vaughn had made sure she had plenty of wood stocked. At school, the children arrived bundled in whatever warm clothing their families could provide, which in some cases was not much. Rebecca started keeping a box of extra mittens and scarves, donated by the women of the camp, and she made sure no child went home cold if she could help it. Vaughn started bringing her supplies without being asked. Extra blankets appeared folded on her porch. A warmer coat showed up hanging on her door one morning. When she tried to thank him or ask how much she owed, he just shook his head. Winter here is serious business, Rebecca. You need to be prepared. It was the first time he had used her given name, and she felt something warm bloom in her chest at the sound of it. You should call me Vaughn, he added. We are past formalities, I think. Vaughn, she said, trying it out. It felt right in her mouth. The next Saturday when he came for dinner, there was a tension in the air that had not been there before. They cooked together, moving around her small space with the ease of familiarity, but every accidental touch, every brush of shoulders or hands seemed charged with meaning. After they ate, Rebecca pulled out a volume of Whitman's poetry and began to read. Vaughn sat at the table listening, and when she glanced up she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, setting the book down. "You are beautiful when you read. You get this look on your face, like the words matter more than anything in the world." No one had ever called her beautiful before. Passably pretty when she made an effort. Respectable looking, but never beautiful. "Vaughn," she said softly. He stood, crossing the small space in 2 strides. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "I have been wanting to do this since that first day. When I saw you standing in front of the trading post, looking lost and determined at the same time." "Do what?" she whispered, though she thought she knew. "This." He kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss she had once received from a boy in Boston. This was deep and claiming and full of a hunger that matched the ache in her own chest. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the solid strength of his body against hers, felt safe and desired and completely overwhelmed all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me if I have misread this. Tell me if you want me to stop." "Do not stop," Rebecca said. "Please do not stop." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. His hands traced the shape of her back, her waist, exploring with a reverence that made her feel precious. She had never been touched like this, had never wanted to be touched like this, but with Vaughn it felt right. It felt like coming home. They moved to her narrow bed, and he was so careful with her, so gentle despite his size and strength. He asked permission with every touch, every kiss, making sure she wanted this, wanted him. And she did. She wanted him with a fierceness that surprised her. Wanted to know every inch of him, wanted to feel that solid strength wrapped around her and know she was his. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the small bed, Vaughn's large frame taking up most of the space. Rebecca was pressed against his side, her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. His hand stroked her hair with infinite gentleness. "I did not plan for that to happen," he said quietly. "I know, neither did I, but I am glad it did. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. I am not a man who knows pretty words or how to be proper. I have lived rough for a long time, but I feel something for you that I have never felt before. You make me want things I stopped letting myself want years ago." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him. In the lamplight, his face was softer than usual, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "What kind of things?" "A home, someone to come back to, a future that is more than just surviving day to day." "I want those things too," she admitted. "I came here thinking I just needed independence, just needed to prove I could take care of myself. But being with you, it does not feel like giving up my independence. It feels like choosing something better." He pulled her back down, kissing her forehead. "Stay with me tonight. Let me hold you. I will have people talking if anyone notices. Let them talk. I do not care about gossip, and you should not either." She smiled against his chest. "You are right, let them talk." The winter came in earnest in late October, and Rebecca learned what Vaughn had meant about this land not forgiving mistakes. Snow fell heavy and constant, piling up against buildings and making the streets treacherous. The mine kept operating, but everything else slowed down. School attendance dropped as families kept children home to help with the endless tasks of winter survival. Rebecca and Vaughn grew closer through those cold months. He spent more and more time at her house, though he was careful about propriety, making sure he left before too late in the evening. They read together, cooked together, talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Virginia, about losing his parents young, about the war that had shaped him in ways he was still understanding. She told him about her own losses, her own struggles, her dreams of a different kind of life. "I love you," he said one evening in December, the words simple and direct. They were sitting by her stove, trying to stay warm as wind howled outside. "I probably should have said it more romantically, with flowers or something, but I am not good at that. I just needed you to know." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day when you carried my ridiculous trunk 8 miles without complaining." He laughed. "That trunk was heavy. I am not going to lie about that, but you never complained, you just did what needed doing. That is what you do for people you care about. You carry their burdens without complaint. Will you marry me, Vaughn Ashford?" He stared at her, clearly shocked. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am. I know it is not traditional, but nothing about us is traditional. I want to build a life with you, want to face whatever comes next together, so yes, I am asking. Will you marry me?" A smile spread across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something radiant. "Yes." Hell yes, Rebecca Rousseau, I will marry you. They were married in January in a simple ceremony at the church the camp had recently built. Dorothy Patterson stood up for Rebecca, and a trapper named Cole Mackenzie stood up for Vaughn. The whole camp turned out, cramming into the small church to witness the wedding of the schoolteacher and the mountain man. Rebecca wore a simple dress of dark green wool, practical but pretty. Vaughn wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vaughn kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance sigh audibly. They spent their wedding night in Vaughn's cabin, which Rebecca was seeing for the first time. It was larger than her teacher's house, built solid and tight against the mountain cold. One big room served as living space, with a sleeping loft above reached by a sturdy ladder. The furnishings were simple but well made, everything built for function and durability. It is not fancy, Vaughn said, watching her take it in. It is perfect, Rebecca said honestly. It is solid and warm and safe. What more could anyone want? I am glad you think so, because I have been thinking. You should move in here. It is bigger than your place, warmer too, and it is closer to the hunting grounds, which means I would not have to be gone as long when I go out. What about the teacher's house? We could turn it into something else. Maybe a reading room, a place where the older students could study. You have all those books. They should be somewhere people can use them. It was a good idea, practical and generous. All right, yes, let us do that. They moved Rebecca's things over the next week, Vaughn carrying load after load up the trail to his cabin. The trunk that had started everything made the journey one last time, and Rebecca laughed when Vaughn huffed slightly, setting it down. Still heavy, he admitted. But worth it? Everything about you is worth it. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Rebecca continued teaching, making the trek down to Silver Ridge each weekday morning and returning to the cabin each evening. Vaughn hunted and trapped, always making sure to be home before she arrived. They cooked dinner together, read together, made love in the big bed Vaughn had built with his own hands. Spring came, bringing wildflowers and warmer weather. The school year was winding down, and Rebecca was already planning for the next year, thinking about curriculum and supplies they would need. Some of her students had made remarkable progress, and she felt proud of what they had accomplished together. One evening in May, she was helping Vaughn prepare a deer he had brought down when she suddenly had to stop, overwhelmed by nausea. She barely made it outside before she was sick. Vaughn followed her, concern written all over his face. Are you all right? Was it something you ate? I do not think so. Rebecca wiped her mouth, thinking. She had been tired lately, and her monthly courses had not come when expected. Vaughn, I think I might be with child. His eyes went wide. Really? Are you sure? Not completely, but the signs are there. We should probably confirm it, but yes, I think so. He picked her up and spun her around, his whoop of joy echoing off the mountainside. We are going to have a baby. Put me down, you madman. You will make me sick again. But she was laughing, caught up in his joy. A baby. Their baby. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Mrs. Patterson confirmed the pregnancy a week later, and suddenly Rebecca's world shifted to accommodate this new reality. She would teach through the end of the current school year, but then she would need to find someone to take over, at least temporarily. The thought of leaving her students made her heart ache, but the thought of the child growing inside her made her glow with happiness. Vaughn became even more protective, if that was possible. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, not walk anywhere alone, not do anything that might be remotely dangerous. It would have been suffocating if it had not been so clearly born of love and concern. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from carrying a small basket of vegetables. I know. But you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I will be damned if anything happens to either of you. How could she argue with that? The baby came in early December, during the first major snowstorm of the winter. Rebecca labored through the night while Vaughn paced and worried and generally made himself useless. Mrs. Patterson and two other experienced mothers attended the birth, shooing Vaughn out to the main room when he tried to hover. Go boil water or something, Mrs. Patterson commanded. Make yourself useful. When the baby finally arrived, pink and squalling and perfect, it was Vaughn who cut the cord with shaking hands. A daughter, they had a daughter. She is beautiful, he breathed, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. She looks just like you. She has your eyes, Rebecca said, exhausted but elated. Look, gray like storm clouds. They named her Victoria Ruth after both their mothers. Little Victoria was a good baby, healthy and strong. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and from the beginning she seemed to know exactly what she wanted and how to get it. Rebecca took a year off from teaching, focusing on motherhood. But she missed the work, missed the students, so when Victoria was old enough, she started teaching again, bringing the baby with her. The students loved having a baby in the classroom, and some of the older girls helped care for Victoria during lessons, which gave them practice in childcare and gave Rebecca freedom to teach. 2 years later, a son arrived. Vincent Henry, named for Vaughn's father and Rebecca's brother. He was bigger than Victoria had been, with his father's build obvious even as an infant. He was also louder, more demanding, but just as loved. Life in Silver Ridge continued around them. The silver vein did start to play out, just as Vaughn had predicted, and some people left for the next boomtown. But others stayed, putting down roots, building something more permanent. The town grew a real school building, with glass windows and a proper floor and enough benches for everyone. Rebecca continued teaching, watching her own children grow up alongside her students. Vaughn built additions onto the cabin as their family grew. A separate bedroom for the children, a proper kitchen, a porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. He taught Vincent to hunt and track, taught Victoria to read the signs of weather and wildlife. He was patient and kind and endlessly devoted to his family. On their 10th anniversary, Rebecca and Vaughn sat on that porch watching their children play in the yard. Victoria was 12 now, tall and strong and smart as a whip. Vincent was 8, all energy and curiosity. A third child, Rose Eleanor, just 2 years old, was toddling between her siblings, demanding to be included in whatever game they were playing. "Do you ever regret it?" Vaughn asked, reaching over to take Rebecca's hand. "Staying here, marrying me this life?" Rebecca looked at her husband, at the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes, the body still strong and capable but showing the wear of years of hard work. She looked at her children, healthy and happy and loved. She looked at the mountains, purple in the fading light, and the cabin that had become a true home. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You carried my trunk that first day, and you have been carrying my burdens ever since, never complaining, just loving me and supporting me and being exactly what I needed. We carry them together now," he said. "That is what marriage is, sharing the weight. I love you, Vaughn Ashford. I love you too, Rebecca Ashford, every single day more than the day before." Victoria came running up then, demanding that her father settle an argument about whether it was too late to go exploring before dinner. Vincent was right behind her, arguing his case with the kind of passion only an 8-year-old could muster. Little Rose toddled up and climbed into Rebecca's lap, sticky hands and all. Rebecca caught Vaughn's eye over the children's heads and smiled. This was not the life she had planned when she stepped off that stagecoach in Unionville all those years ago. It was better. It was everything. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of mountain life. Silver Ridge settled into itself, no longer a boomtown but a real town with permanence and purpose. The mine still produced, though not as abundantly as in the early days. More families arrived, building homes and businesses, putting down roots in the high country. Rebecca's school grew with the town. They eventually built a second room to accommodate all the children, and Rebecca took on an assistant teacher, a young woman named Margaret, who had come west with her family and discovered a talent for teaching. Together they educated generations of children, watching them grow from uncertain beginners to confident young adults ready to face the world. Victoria grew into a remarkable young woman, inheriting her mother's love of learning and her father's practical competence. She was the first student from Silver Ridge to go on to higher education, winning a scholarship to a teaching college in Sacramento. Rebecca cried when she left, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. "She will come back," Vaughn assured her, holding her close. "This place is in her blood, same as it is in ours." He was right. Victoria returned after 2 years, certified to teach, and took a position in a nearby mining camp that desperately needed a school. She married a mining engineer, a serious young man who appreciated her intelligence and independence. And they built a life in the mountains not far from where she had grown up. Vincent stayed closer to home, learning his father's skills and eventually taking over much of the hunting and trapping that supplied their family and others in the region. He married a local girl, the daughter of the blacksmith, and they built a cabin just down the mountain from Vaughn and Rebecca. Their children, 3 boys in quick succession, filled the mountains with noise and laughter. Rose, the baby, surprised everyone by showing a talent for medicine. She apprenticed with the town doctor, learning everything she could, and eventually became the first official nurse in Silver Ridge. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself to caring for the sick and injured. Rebecca worried about her youngest being alone, but Rose was happy, fulfilled by her work and surrounded by community. On their 20th anniversary, Rebecca and Vaughn took a rare trip away from Silver Ridge, traveling to San Francisco for a week. It was Rebecca's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the vastness of it. "It is incredible," she breathed. "I never imagined anything could be so big." "Makes you feel small," Vaughn agreed. He was less comfortable in the city than she had expected, constantly scanning their surroundings with the wariness of a man used to open spaces and clear sightlines. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at restaurants, went to the theater. All the things Rebecca had thought she wanted when she was younger. But by the end of the week they were both eager to return home, to the mountains and their family, and the life they had built together. "I thought I would love this," Rebecca admitted on the train back to Nevada. "The culture, the civilization, all of it. But I kept thinking about our porch and the way the sunset looks from there. About our children and grandchildren. About home." "The mountains get in your blood," Vaughn said. "Once they do, nothing else quite satisfies. It is not just the mountains. It is the life we have built there. The people, the community, the work that matters. That is what I missed." He kissed her forehead. 20 years, and you still surprise me. I thought you might realize what you gave up, choosing this life." "I did not give up anything. I chose something better." They arrived back in Silver Ridge to find their family had organized a surprise celebration. The whole town turned out, cramming into the church hall for a party complete with music and dancing, and enough food to feed an army. Rebecca stood with Vaughn's arm around her waist, watching their children and grandchildren and neighbors, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had somehow stumbled into. Dorothy Patterson, now well into her 70s but still sharp as ever, came over to stand beside them. "You two turned out all right," she said with characteristic bluntness. "I was not sure at first. Thought maybe you were too different, too much the proper lady and the wild man. But you balanced each other out, built something good." "We got lucky," Rebecca said. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You both worked at it, chose each other every day. That is what makes a marriage last." The years accumulated, each one adding depth and texture to their life together. They weathered storms and hardships, celebrated victories and milestones, held each other through losses and grief. When Vincent's wife died in childbirth, they took in their grandsons and raised them until Vincent was ready to be a father again. When Victoria's husband was injured in a mine accident, Vaughn spent weeks helping with the recovery, carrying him when he could not walk, supporting the family until he was back on his feet. Rebecca kept teaching well into her 50s, finally retiring when her hands grew too arthritic to write on the board easily. By then, 2 of her former students had become teachers themselves, carrying on the work she had started decades earlier. The school that had begun as a simple shed now occupied a proper building with 3 rooms and a library, filled with books Rebecca had collected over the years. Vaughn slowed down too, though less willingly. His body, pushed hard for so many years, began to protest. His knees ached in cold weather, his shoulders hurt after a long day of work. But he never complained, just adapted, finding new ways to be useful to his family and community. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought people from miles around. Former students, now adults with children of their own, came to honor the teacher who had shaped their lives. Families Vaughn had helped over the years in ways large and small came to express their gratitude. The church was packed, and Rebecca stood at the front holding Vaughn's hand, struggling not to cry as person after person stood to share stories about how this couple had impacted their lives. "I did not know we had done so much," she whispered to Vaughn during a lull in the testimonials. "We just lived, Rebecca. We just did what needed doing and tried to help where we could. It was more than that. We built something here, something that mattered. We built a lot of things, a family, a school, a community. Not bad for a school teacher and a mountain man." That night, back in their cabin with just the 2 of them, they sat by the fire and talked about the early days. About the trunk and the long walk up the mountain, about awkward dinners and tentative touches, about falling in love in the middle of nowhere. "I knew," Vaughn said suddenly. "That first day, when I saw you standing there with all your luggage and your determination, I knew you were going to change my life. You did not. I did. I spent 3 years alone, convincing myself I was fine that way. Then you showed up, and 5 minutes later I was carrying your trunk up a mountain and thinking about what it would be like to have someone to come home to again. Why did you not say anything? We could have saved so much time. I was scared. What if you did not feel the same way? What if I was just convenient because I was there? I had to be sure it was real before I risked everything." Rebecca moved from her chair to his lap, not caring that they were too old for such nonsense. "It was real from the beginning. Every moment, every day since then, it has been real." He held her close, and they sat like that for a long time, remembering and being grateful. The next decade passed more quickly than any before it. Grandchildren grew up and had children of their own, making Vaughn and Rebecca great-grandparents multiple times over. The family tree they had started together now sprawled across the region, branches reaching into neighboring towns and states. Silver Ridge itself changed with the times. The mine finally closed in the early 1890s, but by then the town had diversified enough to survive. Ranching and timber had replaced silver as the primary industries. The railroad came through in 1893, connecting them to the wider world. But the core of the place remained the same. Hardy people building lives in a hard land, supporting each other through whatever came. Rebecca's health began to fail in her late 60s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many years. She moved slower, tired more easily, needed help with things she had once done without thought. Vaughn was always there, helping without fuss, adjusting their life to accommodate her changing needs the same way she had once adjusted to his world. "I hate being weak," she admitted one evening, frustrated by her inability to do simple tasks. "You are not weak, you are tired. There is a difference. You have earned rest, Rebecca. Let me take care of you. You have been taking care of me for 40 years, and I will keep doing it until one of us gives out. That is the deal we made, remember? For better or worse, in sickness and health." They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just family at the cabin. Victoria and her husband came, along with Vincent and his second wife, Rose, with her endless stories from her nursing work. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the cabin to bursting, and Rebecca sat in the midst of them feeling like the richest woman alive. Vaughn made a speech, short and simple as everything he did. 40 years ago I carried a trunk up a mountain for a woman I had just met. Best decision I ever made. Every step since then has been worth it. Every burden lighter because I shared it with the best partner a man could ask for. I love you, Rebecca, more today than yesterday, just like always. There was not a dry eye in the house. The winter of 1897 was particularly harsh. Snow piled high and temperatures dropped to dangerous levels. Rebecca caught a cold in early December that settled in her chest and would not leave. Rose moved into the cabin to care for her, and Vaughn barely left her side. "You should rest," Rebecca told him one night, seeing the exhaustion in his face. "You have been up for days." "I will rest when you are better, Vaughn." She took his hand, rough and calloused from a lifetime of hard work. "We both know I am not getting better. Do not say that. It is true, and it is all right. I am not afraid." He pressed her hand to his cheek, and she felt wetness there. Vaughn, who had faced down hostile wildlife and survived a war and lived through hardships that would break most men, was crying. "I am not ready to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "I know, but you will be all right. You have family who loves you, a community that needs you, work still to do. You will be all right. Nothing will be all right without you. Yes, it will. It will take time, but it will, and I will be waiting for you, Vaughn. When your time comes, I will be right there waiting." She held on through Christmas, wanting to see her family one more time. They gathered around her bed, 3 generations, all the people whose lives she had touched. She looked at each face, memorizing them, and felt at peace. "Thank you," she said to all of them. "Thank you for letting me be part of this family, this life. It was more than I ever dreamed of." "Thank you for being our mother," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for teaching us," Vincent added, holding his boys close. "Thank you for everything," Rose whispered. Vaughn held her hand as she slipped away, sitting beside her bed as he had sat beside her for 40 years. The last thing Rebecca saw was his face, weathered and beloved, and the last thing she heard was his voice saying, "I love you." The funeral was the largest Silver Ridge had ever seen. People came from miles around to pay their respects to the woman who had been their teacher, their friend, their example of how to live with grace and strength. They buried her in the cemetery overlooking the valley, with a simple stone that read, "Rebecca Rousseau Ashford, beloved wife." Mother Teacher Vaughn stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, staring down at the freshly turned earth. Victoria came back to stand beside him, linking her arm through his. "She loved this view," he said quietly. "Used to say it reminded her why she stayed, why she chose this life. She chose you, Papa, and never regretted it for a moment. I know, I just wish we had more time. You had 40 years. That is more than most people get." He nodded, but the grief in his eyes was bottomless. The months after Rebecca's death were the hardest of Vaughn's life. The cabin felt empty without her presence, without her voice reading poetry in the evenings, or her laugh at something one of the grandchildren had done. He went through the motions of living, but his heart was not in it. His children worried. They took turns staying with him, making sure he ate and kept the cabin warm and did not simply give up. But Vaughn was tougher than that. He had survived war and wilderness and everything else life had thrown at him. He would survive this too, though part of him was not sure he wanted to. Spring came, bringing new life to the mountains. Vaughn started venturing out more, visiting his children and grandchildren, helping where he was needed. Vincent needed help building a new barn. Victoria's daughter was getting married and wanted her grandfather to walk her down the aisle. Rose had patients who needed things carried or heavy work done. Slowly, purpose seeped back into his life. He was not happy, exactly, but he was useful. And being useful had always been enough for Vaughn Ashford. He took to visiting Rebecca's grave every week, sitting on the ground beside it regardless of weather, talking to her like she was still there. He told her about the grandchildren, about the changes in town, about how much he missed her. "I am trying," he told her one spring afternoon. I am doing what you said, keeping on, being there for family. But it is hard without you. Everything is harder without you. The wind rustled through the grass and he imagined it was her answer. 2 more years passed. Vaughn turned 72, still strong for his age, but feeling it more each day. His children wanted him to move in with one of them, but he refused. The cabin was his home, his and Rebecca's, and he would stay there as long as he could manage. He was sitting on the porch one evening in late summer, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, when he felt a pain in his chest. Sharp and sudden, it took his breath away. He knew what it was, had seen enough death to recognize its approach. He was not afraid. If anything, he felt relief. Vincent found him the next morning, still sitting in his chair on the porch, looking out at the view he loved. There was peace on his face, and his hand was resting over his heart where he would have kept Rebecca's memory. They buried him next to Rebecca, and the whole town turned out again to mourn the mountain man who had been their friend and helper for so many decades. The stone they placed beside Rebecca's was similar in style. Vaughn Ashford, beloved husband, father, friend. Years later, when visitors came to the cemetery, they would often stop at those 2 graves, side by side, and comment on how romantic it was that they were together. They did not know the full story, did not know about the trunk or the long walk up the mountain or the 40 years of partnership that followed. But they could sense it somehow, could feel the love that lingered there. The cabin on the mountain eventually went to Vincent's oldest son, who maintained it carefully, preserving it as a family legacy. Rebecca's books went to the school library, a permanent collection bearing her name. Vaughn's tools and skills were passed down through generations, each one learning the lessons of hard work and helping others without expectation of return. The story became legend in Silver Ridge, told and retold, embellished and simplified, but never quite losing its essential truth. The teacher who came west and the mountain man who carried her trunk, who built a life together in hard country, who loved each other without reservation or regret. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in the region, scattered across Nevada and into California. They all knew the story, all felt the pride of being descended from that unlikely match, and when they faced their own hardships, their own heavy burdens, they would remember, carry what needs carrying, help without complaint, choose love even when it is difficult. That was the legacy of Rebecca and Vaughn Ashford, more valuable than silver or gold. A legacy of strength and kindness, of partnership and devotion, of building something lasting in an impermanent world. The mountains stood witness to it all, unchanging and eternal, still beautiful and harsh, and full of possibility for anyone brave enough to make a life there. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on a cabin porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, still together after all these years, still carrying each other's burdens without a single complaint.